Is a large-scale massacre imminent in Sudan? With Western Darfur's city of Fasher under siege by the Rapid Support Forces, residents plus hundreds of thousands who fled there for safety now face the threat of a full-scale RSF attack. With catastrophic levels of hunger already on the horizon, can a truce be reached before thousands more lives are lost? I'm Andrea Sanke, and today's Newsmaker is Sudan. There are already 10 million displaced people in Sudan and 20 million suffering food shortages. That's almost half the country's population. In terms of malnutrition and starvation, the effects of Sudan's civil war dwarf almost every other conflict on the planet. And now the biggest city in Darfur is entirely surrounded, with its residents terrified of what's to come. Fasher is the only city in the region not controlled by the Rapid Support Forces. That's the rebel army, formerly the Janjaweed, who split from government forces a year ago, setting off a civil war. The RSF is now in control of every road into and out of the city, whose population has swollen with the internally displaced. Humanitarian workers fear a rise in atrocities if the RSF takes control. They've historically targeted members of the Masalit ethnic group, many of whom have taken shelter in Fasher. The UN Security Council is urging the warring parties to join direct negotiations in Jeddah now.
An attack on Fasher would be a disaster on top of a disaster. It would put 500,000 internally displaced persons at risk, people who traveled from across Darfur to seek refuge. And that's on top of the 2 million Sudanese who call Fasher home. A crisis of epic proportions is brewing. The warring parties must engage in direct negotiations in Jeddah because this conflict will not be solved on the battlefield. It will be solved at the negotiating table. Fifth and finally, all parties must enable full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, including cross-border and cross-line access.
So the fighting in and around Fasher is exacerbating the growing humanitarian crisis, severely limiting access to food, water, and fuel. Médecins Sans Frontières says its facilities in Fasher are receiving more and more people suffering bullet wounds. Fuel is running out, and water has to be pumped in from ground sources using generators. The UN's refugee agency, meanwhile, says its trucks carrying food can't get into the city because all roads are blocked by RSF fighters.
The window to avert this is rapidly closing, and a concerted diplomatic effort by the international community is needed to push the warring parties to provide access and safety guarantees and adhere to their obligations under international humanitarian law.
Joining me now to discuss the situation on the ground in Sudan and the prospects for peace is from Ankara, Sudan's ambassador to the Republic of Türkiye, Nadir Yousif Eltayeb. Thank you so much for joining me, Ambassador. So as for what is happening right now in Sudan, is it an exaggeration to say that a large-scale massacre by the RSF is possible in Fasher? Or is Sudan's army more in control?
With regard to the situation in Sudan, yes, I agree with you. We are now actually trying our level best as a government to protect the civilians, not only in Fasher or all over Sudan. And the army is doing very well, is making good progress in all areas. But the problem is that this militia, this terrorist militia, is getting support from our side. And always this support is very advanced weapons like even drones and very advanced artillery. So this is getting the situation more complicated. And as well, there is also getting mercenaries from 12 countries. These are recruited. Some of them are even specialized and professional snipers. The number of mercenaries is almost 70%. That is why it's making the situation more complicated and more difficult. But Eventually, the army is capable. Sudanese armed forces has been there for more than 100 years, and they are very professional. They are capable of defeating them.
Then tell me, at this point, moving forward, if there can be, do you think, negotiations, how likely would that be between the RSF, the rebel leaders, and your government? Is General Burhan eager to go to Jeddah and sit down at the table for talks, or is it too premature?
Well, actually, it's very important to state certain facts about this situation. We went to Jeddah seriously, and we were open for a ceasefire which could help the humanitarian assistance to proceed in Sudan. And this agreement was signed on the 13th of May, which indicates that the ceasefire should be immediately, and as well as the evacuation of the RSF soldiers from the houses of the civilians, as well as hospitals and civilian. Even the public utilities were also occupied by RSF militia. So they agreed and they signed on 13th of May that they are going to evacuate and to move their forces from Khartoum, and then after that there will be a ceasefire which should be respected by both. Unfortunately, they refused. After they signed the agreement, they didn't honor the agreement. Even they went further. They occupied more houses in other states, like Jazeera state. In Madani, the capital of Jazeera, mostly is also occupied by them. So they are not serious. The government is serious to go to Jeddah, and if they agree to implement that's what they have agreed upon on May last year. Otherwise, we are going just to be wasting our time. Okay. But we are serious about Jeddah talks if they fulfill those commitments.
If
and
this is
of
not...
course, you know that is the government responsibility to protect the civilians and to protect the people and to make sure that their houses are safe and their life is safe. Now this terrorist militia is making a lot of atrocities, as you know. They're killing people, raping, abducting, and as well as looting. So the civilians are not safe. Okay. Wherever there is RSF, the civilians are not safe, or they will move.
But if the
that
RSF...
is why the government responsibility to make sure that these areas are free.
If the RSF then persists, how severe is your concern that the conflict in Sudan will spill over into neighboring states?
Well, as I said, it depends on the international community. The international community is calling for ceasefire and is calling for end of this war, while they are putting a blind eye on those people who are supporting RSF. Now, those people or these countries which are supporting the RSF are trying to make this war as regional, and as you said, to prolong the war, to destroy Sudan. That is why they should call upon those people who are supporting RSF to stop. Keep away, please. We, as Sudanese armed forces, are capable of defeating this RSF. And some of them are now convinced that this thing is wrong, and they're now submitting and surrendering to the army. We have 2 days ago, one of the commanders who was leading about 3,800, he said, I'm now convinced, I'm now coming back to the army, and he was welcome. So I believe that if this external factor has not been stopped, it's going even to be very serious, as you said, and it's going to even to affect the neighboring countries.
Okay. Ambassador, what does Sudan need to find peace? Who specifically then needs to be involved? You've already kind of talked about who needs to get out of Sudan so that weapons are no longer supplied and that resources, for example, are no longer siphoned off and the fighting isn't prolonged. But who needs to be involved to help you here? Or can Sudan, this government, do it on its own?
Well, actually, we need genuine partners. We need genuine countries who are serious and who are also fair to get involved seriously in this case. Because unfortunately, we have many biased powers who are unfortunately taking part in the meddling, while we know that they are supporting RSF. This thing will never go. We need genuine partners who are serious and who are neutral and serious to resolve this conflict.
Okay. Let me ask you, though, Ambassador, if you get those partners and that support you mentioned, and the government can maintain or regain control of Greater Sudan, will your government move to elections? Because it's also a major sticking point for support to be forthcoming. Partnerships want to see your government democratically elected before they invest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, let me assure you that the government is very keen to hold fair and free elections as soon as possible. Immediately, they will make a technocrat government, just transitional, to make sure that those elections will be held in a very transparent way, and they will call upon all political parties to get prepared for the elections. This is assured. They are not going to stay in power for long. Actually, it's going to be a technocrat government until the elections are held. So this is assured, yes.
Ambassador Nadir Yousif Eltayeb, thank you so much for being with us on the Newsmakers. We greatly appreciate it. Let's look further now at the current situation in Sudan and welcome our panelists. Joining me from Warsaw is the chairman at Sudan of the Future, Adil Abdel Aati. From London, Director of the Africa Program at Chatham House, Alex Vines. And from Paris, Claire Nicolet is the Head of Emergencies for Médecins Sans Frontières. Thanks all so much for being with me. Alex, I'll begin with you. I just actually spoke to Sudan's ambassador to Türkiye. He believes that the Sudanese army will be able to defend Fasher and prevent any kind of massacre. Would you share his confidence?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, it's the only location left that the Sudanese army is in control of, really, in Darfur, and Fasher is in a very vulnerable situation. So fully understand why the ambassador needs to show that he's got full confidence in the Sudanese military. But I think the situation is a lot more bleak in reality.
So what do you foresee unfolding?
Well, I think we're all very worried of a serious humanitarian crisis exacerbated around fierce fighting in Fasher. And where do those displaced people go? I'm sure later on this program, we're going to talk about the overall humanitarian crisis that's in Sudan. But Darfur is a particularly virulent part of that problem. And so this is really worrying for all of us. I think the question is how to try and prevail on the warring parties to reach a cessation of hostilities.
Yeah.
There's no military victory, despite what the RSF and the armed forces of Sudan say. There is no clear-cut victor in this crisis.
So
everybody is a loser.
Yeah, help us understand then what the RSF is actually after here. If they do commit a massacre of the people that they eventually want to rule over, what are they doing now?
Well, the RSF are in control of major parts of Sudan, including the Khartoum and areas of central Sudan. This is a very brutal power struggle between the RSF and the armed forces of Sudan, and so it's a tug of war. And humanitarians are the ones that are being badly impacted. My fear is, as this protracts, other countries get more involved in fragmenting Sudan further. Right. And what we're looking like is that we're moving towards a fragmented country, even one that is in partition, which is not good for the Sudanese at all.
Claire, let me turn to you, because the humanitarian catastrophe, I would say, looming. It's not really looming. It's already there, and it's going to be exacerbated. Hunger in Sudan has already doubled in just the last year. So how much humanitarian relief is actually needed right now? And will we see those catastrophic levels of hunger that aid workers have been talking about coming?
Yeah, so the situation is very dire. Already because this situation is, we see malnutrition rates that are completely catastrophic. So when we speak about North Darfur, Zamzam camp in particular, we are speaking of 1/3 of under 5 and pregnant and lactating women are malnourished. This is just somehow, unfortunately, the beginning, because this is the best period, I could say, normally in terms of nutrition, and we are not now entering in the malnutrition period, and after malaria as well will come. So we are normally at the really the good period, I may say, and unfortunately we don't see any food coming. There is a very big lack of humanitarian response at the moment. We are speaking of Darfur, we are speaking about Kordofan, we are speaking about Khartoum. All these areas are almost empty of any actors. We are, as MSF, very few part of the very few actors still there. But unfortunately, even acting is very difficult because of lots of constraints, of lack of access, because of procedures that makes a lot of time and so on. So really, we are really quite stressed out of what's coming in. And of course, it really might be worse and already is completely terrible situation for this population.
Right. I mean, MSF has said they're not getting the international support they need to get the aid that's necessary. Plus, what is there, they can't get into and out of Al-Fasher. So it's all being constantly compounded. And it's hard to imagine how much worse it can get, but apparently we're set to see worse. But let me turn to Adil, because if we move forward now, as Alex was saying, and as the ambassador was saying, everyone needs to actually negotiate at this point so there can be a political solution reached, because there is no actual military solution in this fighting. So, Adil, what incentives are there for both the government and the RSF to actually come to the table and look for a solution to this fighting?
As you said, many observers, they believe that there should be a political solution, but not the leaders of the conflict, because both of RSF leaders and the army leaders, they believe in a military victory, and they are trying their best to make new advances and to make new changes in the ground. The army had gained ground in Omdurman and now in Khartoum North, which is called Bahri. They are also advancing and getting some victories on the ground against RSF. But RSF is attacking in North Darfur, and they took Malit already, a big town, and they put Al-Fasher under siege. So also they are trying to go to Al-Gadarif state in eastern Sudan, and also they were attacking some of the towns on northern Sudan like Atbara with drones. So they still believe in a military solution. They still believe that they can change the situation on the ground. And till we have this military mentality on the leaders of the two sides, the war will continue.
Alex, then are we just watching a train smash of the worst kind in slow motion here? Because it sounds like there is no answer. They are not going to sit down at the table. The RSF is moving into Al-Fasher. So is this large-scale massacre coming? And nobody is there to stop it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the world is crying out for attention. Certain people, the Norwegian Refugee Council, the World Food Programme has announced that Sudan has 25 million people that are vulnerable to famine, that it could be the worst food catastrophe in the world. But the problem is that the leaders of the protagonist groups, the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces, believe that they can achieve a military victory. So at the moment, the prognosis for Sudan is very bleak. I think the only way to knock heads together would be the supporters of these factions to be really lent upon, to desist from providing drones, ammunition, weapons, and to prevail that there needs to be a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons to get that aid distributed around the country. There's not much sign of that yet, but Egypt is very involved in this conflict, as is, for example, the United Arab Emirates, and both do have influence over the leaders of the armed forces of Sudan and the RSF.
Adil, would you agree there that that's where peace might have to start, to get external players out of the picture, no more support, and then what? Can they move on to a democratic transition?
The problem is that the international community is not involving in real will to solve this problem. And the main players are the regional players, like the United Arab Emirates or like Egypt, or even Ethiopia and Eritrea and neighboring countries. All these countries, they have interest in the war. They are supporting this side or the other side. So they are not a neutral forces to help to get to cease fire or to gain peace. We see that the lack of initiatives of Saudi Arabia, which could be an acceptable partner for both parties. And this is because of the failure of Jeddah negotiation. Jeddah negotiation, I think that they were very quick, and at that time nobody was interested really in talking. Now, after 1 year, maybe the parties will be interested. If there will be good partners, there will be a good facilitator.
Okay. I mean, Alex, looking forward, we also heard Sudan's ambassador to Ankara say that once a resolution to the fighting is found, the government of General Burhan is actually looking forward to elections. Do you see that happening?
Oh, well, that's a long-term prospect. I mean, eventually there does need to be a return to constitutional rule and elections, and you can see where there have been coups and military administrations, that is the longer-term trajectory. Today, there is elections in neighboring Chad, for example, which is a process that is ending in an election and hopefully return to constitutional rule. But I mean, this is far off. As your previous speaker spoke about, we really need first a cessation of hostilities, and we do need some very effective mediation to prevail on both the warring sides that a military solution is not possible. My own pessimistic prognosis is we're going to have to see a hurting stalemate, that both sides are going to have to conclude that they can't get all-out military victory. And what a humanitarian cost might that be? I mean, already we're talking 25 million people that are in need of food, 17.7 million in acute need of food. How many more do we need before there's a recognition that actually there needs to be negotiations?
Right. Claire, I see you agree with what Alex was saying, but let me ask you then, back in Al-Fasher, you know, this is considered really the only humanitarian city in that entire region. It was the only place where aid workers could actually work out of, where people could get assistance. So what is happening to those aid workers? Who will be able to even get basic help?
So that's one of the major difficulty at the moment. As you mentioned, there were lots of displaced people from all over Darfur finding kind of safe haven in North Darfur, in Al-Fasher, in Zamzam. In Al-Fasher itself, there are lots of gathering sites of displaced people of all over the Darfur, especially Nyala, Tawila, and at the moment, that's the very big difficulty, because where they will move, will they be able to move? Will they stay here, but without any humanitarian aid? So we are now with very few actors, And of course, with the insecurity, it's more and more difficult to act, and it's also more and more difficult because, of course, with insecurity, you have new wounded, you have new difficulties and needs appearing, and that's what we have seen in the past 2 to 3 weeks, that we receive lots of wounded also because of the intensity of the fighting around Al-Fasher. So of course that's a very difficult one, because we were expecting more actors to come and try to respond to this huge income of displaced people around Al-Fasher and in the area. And unfortunately now we are seeing this, even this window being closed more and more,
Right.
and with
And
very
are
high
the aid workers
insecurity.
working in absolute fear as well?
Well, of course, there are lots of rumors, as you know, and of course, everyone is kind of worried. But we are mostly worried of how we can continue our activities, because if tomorrow you have to be just staying in your house, not being able to move wherever, you will not help anyone.
Right.
So this is a very difficult situation, obviously, for the aid workers at the moment.
Okay, Claire, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sanke. We'll see you next time.